Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I have a fascinating person to introduce you to today. Paula Davis is the founder and CEO of the Stress and Resilience Institute. It's a training and consulting firm that partners with organizations to help them reduce burnout and build resilience at the team, leader, and organizational level. And I think all of us have been encountering a little bit of stress and needing a little bit more resilience during the last little while as we've struggled with work from home, hybrid business models, whether the world's going to come to a crashing whatever with COVID-19, whether we want to get a vaccine or not get a vaccine, whether we should be supportive of vaccine mandates, who we should be voting for, et cetera. It seems like there's just been so many issues that we've all been faced with. And so I thought it'd be really helpful to talk to someone that's an expert on dealing with stress and building resilience. And Paula is interesting because she actually was a lawyer. She left her law practice after 7 years and earned a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. And as part of her postgraduate training, she was selected to be part of the University of Pennsylvania's faculty teaching and training resilient skills to soldiers as part of the Army's comprehensive soldier and family fitness program. The Penn team trained resilient skills to more than 40,000 soldiers and their family members. Paul is the author of Beating Burnout at Work, Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience, which is about burnout prevention using a teams-based approach. Paula, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell me a little bit about beating burnout at work. How do you do that? I need some help.
So that is burnout is actually what ended my law practice, my law career. So I burned out during what became the last year of my law practice, and I became really interested in wanting to go back to study the effects of stress and well-being and resilience, and what could we do about all of the swirl of factors that we experience at work. And in doing that, I've learned a lot of lessons that eventually are what became the book. And so when I first stopped my law practice and then went back for my master's degree, I was still pretty confused about what burnout was and why it happened to me. And I blamed myself a lot for it, thinking that I must have missed some stress management memo along the way. Like, what was this thing that happened to me? And over the course of my own research and then, reading all of the research that is out there on the topic, because this is a topic that's been studied for quite some time, I realized that we had to start to approach the burnout in a different way. We had to start looking at it as a systemic issue, needing holistic strategies that focus on at least talking about some of the causes of burnout. And so it's all of those lessons and all of that stuff, essentially. I tried to really codify and put in my book in terms of how can we then do that? How can we start to approach looking at this topic in the way that's actually going to move the needle forward?
So the way it's described is it's a scientific approach and a holistic approach. How is that different than what other people have used as a way of dealing with burnout?
Well, I think the holistic approach certainly is quite different. It is, again, recognizing that just focusing on individual strategies, and oftentimes that's what happens when we try to address burnout. We focus solely or put the onus solely on individuals to just get better at managing stress and prioritizing self-care, and those things are really important. Well-being strategies are an important component of preventing burnout, but when folks are actually feeling burned out and that happens, some of these well-being strategies and frontline, basic self-care strategies just aren't the right tools to really address what's going on. And so taking a step back and thinking about then, if the organization, if teams, if leaders have a big part in this conversation, which they do, how do we address and bring in all of that piece as well? And so I can't walk into organizations and just say, change your culture and it'll all be good. Like, I wish I could, but I can't. And so for me, that was really my task with the book, is thinking about then where in the system is the best place to focus if we really need to address the individual and the rest of the system, a me and a we approach to all of this. And so that's how I came up with the model for teams, and thinking that teams are little mini systems within the big organizational system. And if we can get some or a lot of our teams really being proactive in creating the right kind of environment that we know slows burnout down and promotes things like well-being and resilience and whatnot, then we can be headed in the right direction with us.
What do you mean teams? So this is your organization at work, and what does it have to do to help you build up the resilience so you don't get burnt out? What, like, is it just going out for pizza more often, or having coffee more often? What is it you have to do?
That can certainly be part of it. So what I wanted to do was really dig into the research. So not only my own, but just wanting to read anything I could to get any study, any sort of scientific based something that I could get my hands on, looking at if we're going to create high performing, resilient teams that prioritize and build well-being and thriving and all of these things that we want, where do we need to focus? What are the competencies or the muscles that teams and leaders and the folks who make up teams need to start to prioritize and to flex? And so that's the acronym that I came up with in my book. So after reading multiple dozens of studies on this, there were really some themes that emerged. And so that became the model that I put in my book with the acronym PRIMED. So each of the components of that acronym stand for a really important something that either a leader, the team collectively, individual team members, or all of the above need to really think about or focus on if we want to, again, sort of move to this type of environment where burnout is less likely to happen.
We're chatting tonight with Paula Davis, who is a author of a book about beating burnout at work. It's called Beating Burnout at Work: Why Teams Hold the Secret to Wellbeing and Resilience. How can you get this on Amazon, at a bookstore? Where can you buy it?
Yeah, wherever books are sold. So Amazon is a great place. barnesandnoble.com is a great place. You can go onto my website, which is stressandresilience.com. So you can buy it there as well.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Paula Davis in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Second and 60. We're chatting tonight with Paula Davis. She is the author of a book called Beating Burnout at Work: Why Teams Hold the Secret to Wellbeing and Resilience. Paula, you've got a JD and an MAPP. Tell us, please. I think most of us know that a JD is a law degree. What the heck is an MAPP?
One of the questions I'm most frequently asked. So it's a master's degree. So it's a master's degree in applied positive psychology. And so then a lot of people will ask, I didn't know there was a positive psychology. Is that the opposite of negative psychology? And really it was meant to be just an area of science. First of all of the things that fall under positive psychology have existed as some things to be studied for many years. So it's things like resilience and positive emotions and, the importance of relationships and all of that, really meant to help us focus on not how do we help people just get back to baseline in terms of health, but how do we help people start to thrive and flourish? So get beyond just kind of that zero set point.
Tell us a little bit about your own story, if you could. You were a lawyer. You were there for 7 years. You burnt out, and you left the law and went back to do a master's. Tell us a little bit about what happened.
Sure. So there were really 3 big warning signs that I missed during my process of burning out. And I think part of it was because I didn't know what burnout really was. I mean, if you had asked me to define burnout, have you heard the word? I would have said yes, and probably something associated with stress, but I had no idea really what was truly, a factor in helping or causing people to burn out. And so there were 3 big warning signs that I missed. Had I known them, I would have probably been able to catch my burnout a little bit sooner. But the first one is that I was chronically physically and emotionally exhausted. So this was, no matter what I did, I never seemed to be able to recharge my batteries, replenish the tank. I remember, Sunday.
Hold on a second. Chronically, what you say is emotionally, physically
exhausted. Chronic emotional and physical exhaustion.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and that's just the first part of it. So that is, I think, something that a lot of people, when they think of being burned out or the word burnout, that's one of the first words that oftentimes comes to mind for people is I'm just tired, I'm spent, I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted, some version of that. And I'm a single mom. Practice law. I have my own business. And I mean, I understand what tired, feels like, but this was different. And it was, really, Sunday night, staring at the clock, just wishing I could freeze time because I didn't want to go back to work on Monday morning because I just didn't have the energy reserves to do that. The second big warning sign that I missed was just being chronically cynical. So this is a really important one for people to pay attention to. So everyone started to annoy me. Everyone started to bother me. People who I loved having lunches with and would go out on Friday evenings for beverages and things like that. I'd go into the office, I'd say hello to everybody, and I'd go right into my own office and shut the door and would hope that I just didn't hear from people for a really long time. And that's, certainly not my personality, but not a good way to interact with my business clients and things, when they have really difficult questions that they need to bring to me as part of my law practice. And then the last big warning sign that I missed is that I was very much feeling a sense of lost confidence. So not in my ability to be a good lawyer, but in my ability to really see a meaningful path for myself in the profession and to really honestly understand where was the meaning and impact that I was making in my work. Was this really all that there is for my work for me to do? Is this really what I wanted to do long-term in my career? And so it was all three of those things. And so what I didn't know then, but I discovered after, is that those three big warning signs are the three big dimensions of burnout. So when people are thinking about, am I just feeling stressed or is it moving towards something like burnout? It's those three things that you really want to pay attention to first and foremost.
How did you come to this realization that it was burnout, not just stress?
So it really took some time, and I kind of had to self-diagnose. I had to really figure it out for myself again, because I didn't know where to start. And I can't remember if it is like an article I stumbled upon or just through, reading more, research or just some of my ongoing studies at UPenn. It was probably a mixture of all of that, where I started to key in on, wow, this wasn't just stress. This was sort of like a specialized sort of subset of stress. And it's a work-related type of stress. And there's all of these facets to it. And, this science behind it. And so it was a slow uncovering process. It was a slow process for me to recover and figure out what happened. And then to also kind of put a label to it so that I could understand what it was that had actually happened to me.
Was it a difficult decision to leave the law and go back to school and do a master's?
Yes and no. I mean, there were aspects of practicing law that I liked. And in fact, a lot of people ask me, some people I think just assume that, oh, you were burned out, so you just left. This was a very long, it was over the course of a year where I really, really thought about how could I stay in the legal profession? I knew what I was doing in that particular role was not what I wanted to do. And it was driving a lot of my stress. I actually talked to my boss. I was working in a company in a legal department at the time. And I actually asked him, can I stay? But, I want to be doing something different. Like I just can't keep up this particular pace with the work that I'm doing. Can I focus on learning something different, potentially, some different aspect of the law or area of the law? Because I think that would give me some renewed sort of energy and just vigor around my practice. And he thought that was a great idea. His boss and the powers that be did not want me to switch and do anything different than what I was doing. And so I actually tried a couple of different approaches to both stay at the company that I was at and then also stay in the profession generally. But part of what ended up happening, because my burnout happened, and kept extending itself essentially, I ended up really noticing some physical and mental health related consequences from it. So I started to get panic attacks on a very frequent basis. And I ended up in the emergency room twice because really bad stomach aches from the stress that I was experiencing. So it was not the first time, which is puzzling, but the second time I walked out of the emergency room, I was thinking to myself, okay, this is bad. Like you can't keep doing this, right? It's one thing to put a lot of time and effort into your career, but it's pretty much craziness to put your health in jeopardy. And so at that point, the decision to leave and do something else became a lot easier.
Now, you said you're a single mom. So did become a mother and maybe the end of a relationship complicate the situation?
So Lucy, my daughter Lucy, is 5.5. And so thankful for the timing in which she came into my life. And so my burnout happened about 10 years or so ago. So that was one of the things that made actually transitioning to business owner and pursuing this goal of owning a business that I had a lot easier. I think it would have been a lot more difficult, had she been in my life and trying to figure out kind of all of those pieces to maneuver. So I had a chance to really start my business, work with the US Army, and kind of get my business up and running. And then she came into our lives, and the end of our relationship is something that's quite current. So that wrap up, that new to single motherhood in the last year or so.
So that has probably created some other stress issues that are unrelated to the original stress issues.
Yeah. And so one of the things I'm actually thankful for, I consider burnout to be a blessing, because it really is one of those things that it forces you to really kind of look inside internally and think, like, is this really what I want to do? Is this, is my time meant to be spent doing something different? How do I want to orient my work and my time at work? And so it taught me a lot of lessons. And being as busy as I've been in my business is growing, the end of the relationship, having a 5.5-year-old, all of those things really do add up to a lot of stress. And so I'm thankful to now recognize what I didn't know 10 years ago is what to look for and how not to, continue to walk toward burnout, and so it doesn't happen again.
You said that a lot of your ideas were summarized up in the word prime. Can you tell us a little bit about prime, what the PRIME all stand for?
Sure. Yeah. The P is actually two pieces. It's two P's. It is psychological safety and psychological needs, which are just two very fancy research terms just to mean trust and motivation. So it's really the foundational layer of building the type of teams that we know can slow burnout down. So there has to be a lot of trust within the team, and there has to be a sense of motivation within the team. So those two things are really important. The R is about relationships. So we know pretty clearly whether we're talking about resilience or well-being or thriving or any positive thing we want to see, having those solid connections. And I think we've all learned this lesson during the pandemic, having people who you can rely on, and somebody who you can call up or Zoom, or just someone in your space for that social support or just support generally, is just really important. So that's the R. The I is impact. It's impact, and I squeezed in meaning with that too. So recognizing for yourself and for your team, like what is the meaning and the impact that you're making within your organization, generally within your profession? Do you individually understand clearly how you're contributing to that sense of impact? What gives you meaning about your work? So that's important. The M is mental strength. So it's one of my favorite chapters, and honestly, for myself, one of my still biggest resilience building blocks. But it's interesting to talk about both collectively as a team and then also as individual team members, how we think under stress and pressure. And when our thinking becomes counterproductive, that can zap a lot of energy. It can really influence and erode trust and motivation. And so, it factors into some of these other pieces quite a bit. The E is energy. So that was my door to talk about things like positive emotions and how leaders can inspire team members, and just some of the ways that we can build stress awareness and deal with burnout generally. So
fascinating. Tell me a little bit more about mental strength. What do you mean by mental strength again?
Sure. So it is thinking about our thinking, essentially. So when we are under stress and pressure,
so it's not just positive thinking.
No. I sort of the positive psychologist in me sort of winces at the phrase positive thinking for a whole host of reasons, but it's actually being really good at reappraisal. So understanding, and not in a falsely positive sense, but really understanding for yourself how you think under stress and pressure, and what are some triggers that might cause your thinking to become counterproductive. So two skills that I talk about a lot under this category. One is catastrophizing. So the notion of when something stressful happens, in 5 minutes, we got ourselves living in a van down by the river. It's all going wrong, no matter what I do. And we sort of spin a story sometimes quite quickly in our head, full of worst case scenario steps, essentially, about how something's all going to go wrong. And we oftentimes don't have a lot of data or evidence to support that. But that's just where our brain tends to go, and it can really zap a lot of energy from us. The other counterproductive thinking style I talk about a lot with folks is overthinking or ruminating. So I oftentimes will call myself the president of the overthinking club. So it's classic me to be 11 o'clock at night laying in bed, just looping and thinking about everything I didn't do. And I wish I would have said this to this person. And that over and over sort of thinking about, all manner of things. And so there's great strategies to help sort of break up those counterproductive thinking styles that I talk about.
Okay. So two really interesting words.
Catastrophizing.
Catastrophizing and ruminating. How do you deal with catastrophizing and ruminating, or over catastrophizing and over ruminating?
Yeah. So I think of catastrophizing because it's a pesky word to say. I think about it as worst case scenario thinking, which is certainly easier phrase to say. But so there's a 3-part process that I talk about in the book. And first of all, it's to recognize what is the stress producing event, right? So oftentimes when I'm talking to work groups, I will give an example of, have you ever gotten an email from your boss that says, come see me now? And that's all it says. Or you get a voicemail message from somebody that says, call me back. And that's all it says. In the next moment, we don't oftentimes think that our boss is going to tell us that we just did something really good. We oftentimes think, oh no, there's a disaster and I don't even know what it was, but I know it's my fault. And off we go. And so
catastrophizing.
So first of all, we have to understand, what's the stress producing event? So just got an email from my boss that said, come see me now. The next step is to write the worst case scenario. So I call it your horror movie. So this is everything's going wrong. What is it that you're saying about the situation in your head? And then the next step is to create your Disney movie. So it's almost sort of the opposite. So you're giving your brain sort of these parameters, right? So it's all going wrong and then it's all going right. We're creating our Disney movie. And it's not about logic in either step. For the Disney movie version of your story, it's about creating a jolt of positive emotion. It's just sort of to get yourself to go, almost like, that's just crazy, right? And so you could say, the stress producing event is my boss sends me an email that says, come see me now. The Disney movie is, she's going to tell me not only did I do a good job, I did the best job she's ever seen, and that I should be promoted to CEO of the company tomorrow. Clearly not going to happen, but it's just sort of a funny kind of, okay. So that in step 3, you can create your documentary. So what's most likely? And it's taking into account that, again, this is not about all positive stuff, right? If you know that you turned in a work assignment, there may be something wrong with it perhaps, or, you may not have had a great interaction with a client and that's what your boss wants to talk about. So it's being more even-handed, at least in how you see the situation. So that's a process to help with catastrophizing. And then with the overthinking or ruminating, there's a number of great strategies. One is just writing it out, like expressive writing, like just literally in the research. I know it's so like 1985, but the research would say take pen to paper and literally write it out. Just not for punctuation or anything, but it's literally just to kind of get it out of your head so that your brain then says, oh, I don't have to hang on to it so tightly. You got it covered somewhere else. I can let go of it. So that expressive writing piece is really important. And one of my favorite strategies, it's the one that I always use, is one that a drill sergeant taught me. And he called it the alphabet game. And so what he said is to start with the letter A and create a sentence where every word in the sentence starts with the letter A. So you could say all astronauts are awesome. And then you go on to the letter B and you could say big bananas buy boats, right? They don't have to make sense, these sentences, but each word in the sentence is the letter that you're on. So I find then by the time I get to H or to I or to J, my brain is now so focused on creating these silly sentences that I've kind of distracted myself, essentially. I've changed the channel of my thinking and I've forgotten about what I was overthinking about. Then it helps me get back to what I'm supposed to do. And that could be falling asleep. That could be writing an article. So those are just a couple strategies that help.
We're chatting tonight with Paula Davis, who is the author of a book called Beating Burnout at Work, Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Paula. I'm going to ask her a little bit about her experience training 40,000 people in the Army and their families. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a really fun evening tonight talking to Paula Davis, who is the author of a book called Beating Burnout at Work, Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience. She's got a law degree and something called an MAPP, a Master's of Applied Positive Psychology. I never knew it was a positive psychology versus a regular psychology. It'll be interesting to find out from a regular psychologist what they think the difference is between a positive one and a regular one. But anyway, you got a positive, applied positive psychology. You said that you had trained 40,000 Army people and their families in resilience training. Tell me what you did. That sounds fascinating.
It was fascinating. And I will tell you that I am a different person, and I would not have the business that I have today had I not, for a whole host of reasons, had I not had the experience of working with Army soldiers and Department of the Army civilians and their families for a whole host of reasons. So the work was as impactful for me as I know we collectively made it for the soldiers. And so that number 40,000 is very much a collective number. So when the program was piloted in 2009, we didn't know how it was going to be received. We didn't really know a lot about it. And it turned into a very successful program where the University of Pennsylvania and the Army created mobile training teams. And so one of the fascinating things about the training team that I and others were on is that it was a blended training team. So it was some of us who had our masters in applied positive psychology, but we were training right alongside soldiers who had gone through the program, who we then elevated to be part of our training team. We also had sports psychologists, a lot of sports psychologists who were on our team as well, handling different aspects and phases of the training too. So it was a really interesting experience, and it was a train the trainer style program. So the whole entire program was 10 days. And so that's a lot of time. You never get 10 days or even remotely close to that when you're in, the workplace setting. So we had 10 days with the soldiers. Those of us who were from the University of Pennsylvania side of the house were there for the first 8 days. And so it was the first 5 days were spent really teaching a core curriculum of skills, of resilience skills that the University of Pennsylvania researchers had really tested and vetted over 20 to 30 years in their own work, showing that they really did help improve resilience and help manage depression and anxiety and lead to better performance and a whole host of things. And so the first 5 days were us teaching that core set of skills to the soldiers. And then the next 3 days were them teaching the skills back to us. So we could essentially evaluate them and, give them tips and pointers, because the whole point of this program was to send these folks, and they were usually senior level non-commissioned officers and officers, back to their units to essentially pay it forward, to continue to teach and reteach and train these skills to the lower ranking soldiers in their unit. And so that was, the Army and Penn's way of really trying to scale this type of training. So that was the program. That was the program in a nutshell. And it was just a fascinating experience. I mean, a lot of my work was at the University of Pennsylvania, but as the program again really took off, we created mobile training teams where we got a chance to go to different Army bases in the United States and around the world, really to do this work, to do these trainings. And the Army, I think they stood up, it was at least a dozen resiliency centers at different Army bases, again, mostly in the United States, where this training really could happen. It was a dedicated space where, soldiers had access to different resilience related resources and videos and, where the training could happen. So it was really interesting to see how, a very strict sort of hierarchical organization embraced something, like the psychological and social aspects of building resilience and really focusing on well-being and mental health.
I guess I find it surprising because my image of the Army would have been, you just got to be strong and you got to tough it out, buddy, and not the sort of the softer skills that you're talking about in regards to relationships and building resilience and well-being and things like that. How did you convince an army to accept some of these softer skills?
It was a bit of a process, and I don't think it was really so much convincing, because on the front end, it was really General George Casey at the time who reached out to Martin Seligman, Dr. Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, and really said, look, we have a problem. We, this was again 2008, 2009. So we had been into multiple deployment cycles with the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. And the Army was really staring at some really grim statistics and some not so great outcomes, and seeing a lot of negative impacts from, again, these multiple deployments. And so, one of the things that I really realized, doing this work, is we had 1% of our population essentially fighting both of these wars. And so it wasn't just, deploy once and you're all good. A lot of my friends and colleagues who in the military who I worked with were deployed 4, 5, 6 times. And so that takes a toll on their physical and mental health, and it really takes a toll on their relationships. And so the relationship piece was actually a really important component of what we talked about. So I don't think it was necessarily like needing to convince them. It was them being the, some of the top brass in the Army saying, look, we got a problem, and we got to prioritize, training well-being in the same way that we have always prioritized physical fitness. We have to prioritize mental fitness, and we don't do that by creating problems and then trying to train it. It's how do we kind of start to proactively get ahead of these issues that we're seeing. And so that was really, kind of the big picture formation of it. But having said that, and this was, again, a big part of me being naive, was me thinking like, oh, okay, the general of the Army has said something and poof, it will just happen because that's what happens in the military. And that's not the case. And for, the first part of at least the time that I was part of the training, we had soldiers who were coming to these trainings thinking it was about physical fitness. The messaging that the military put out about this was not cohesive. There were usually segments of groups that we taught who were just like, I don't know what this is, but it's not for me, and I'm not listening, and I'm unwilling. And so we would start each course by saying, if you want to be skeptical, that's fine. What we don't tolerate is closed-mindedness. So at least lean in a little bit and hear what we have to say. And it didn't usually take too terribly long before, certainly, a couple of, day or two, where most of the soldiers were like, okay, like I get this. And then certainly as we were proceeding through the course, not only did they get it, they were really bought in. I think the average score was a 4.9 out of 5, very consistently by the soldiers, many of whom reported this was the best training they had ever been to in their military career. By the time, we wound down our involvement with the program, there were just a lot of soldiers who were actively seeking out spots in the course to be part of the training because they just knew more about it. They had heard something about it and just wanted to be part of it. So.
What a great experience and a great learning environment and a pretty tough audience. So that must have been very rewarding for you. The R in Prime is relationships. Tell us a little bit about how you build good relationships, strong relationships, whether in your personal life or your work life.
So this was, I'll tell you about a skill that we not only we taught the soldiers, but this was, one of the skills that we learned, during my master's coursework as well. And it really changed my thinking about how to think about and approach relationships, because of course, as a lawyer, thinking my thinking as a lawyer, my training as a lawyer was always to focus on the downside of things and when things go wrong and what's bad. And so that's really the lens that I looked through when it came to relationships. Like, will you be there for me when things go wrong? And, how do we deal with, negative emotions and the negative stuff in relationships? And one of the key skills, again, that we taught and that I learned was really flipping that and recognizing how important it is to cement and grow healthy relationships by focusing on when somebody shares something positive or a small success or a win or a good stuff in the context of the relationship. Do you support that? Do you respond to that good news in a way that really advances the conversation? Because frankly, most of us don't. Like we just don't prioritize. We're not wired as humans to seek out and notice and remember positive stuff, positive information.
Really? We remember negative stuff, but not positive stuff?
Yeah, it's called a negativity bias. So we are hardwired to notice and seek out and remember all of the bad stuff, essentially, the downside of things, what could go wrong. And
Really?
that was
Why do we have a negativity bias?
the really strong evolutionary purpose, right? So way back in the day, if we walked out of our cave and went, oh, isn't it beautiful? I bet it's going to turn out to be a great day today. And we missed, the big, problem that was lurking, we would die, and we wouldn't, continue to evolve as a species. And so there's very, very long ago, evolutionary root in the fact that it's just how humans tend to be wired. So if I'm paying attention to the rainbows and the unicorns and all of the good stuff, then I'm missing something that could potentially be a catastrophic stressor for me. And that would be a problem. And so even though in our world today, we don't have to worry about usually, the big lurking giant problem when we walk out our front door in terms of something that's going to harm us necessarily, it's still how we are wired. So, and we carry that with us. So in relationships, thinking about how you support somebody's good news, somebody who you care about, somebody who's important to you, really made an impact on me, because I realized I was either, there's different response styles that we talked about. So, someone's telling you something maybe good, it could be at work or it could be at home, and you're finishing a text, or you're cooking dinner, you're just preoccupied in other ways. So you're not really hearing the conversation, and you're not asking questions about it. So the conversation just really fizzles out. There's no place for it to go. There's also when someone's really excited about something, and the person who hears the good news might say, oh yeah, that reminds me of, and then they just hijack the conversation and sort of run away with it. So that's another version of not supporting somebody's good news. A third version that sometimes we do is somebody might share something great with us, and we might say oh, well, did you consider? Are you sure? What if? We tend to sort of issue spot the good news. And then the only style that builds this high quality supportive relationship context is what the research calls active constructive responding, or ACR. So it's literally just asking one more question than you normally would. Oh, you got a promotion. Tell me how you're going to celebrate. Tell me more about, all of the years of hard work that you put into, getting this particular position, or that vacation that you're going on. Tell me why, going to Hawaii is something that you're really looking forward to. Just asking one or two more questions and being a little curious about it is enough to really make the person who has the good news feel supported. So there's phenomenal research just talking about how that translates into higher quality relationships, just feeling a sense of, efficacy or confidence in the quality of your relationship, and positive emotions, and all of the things that are so kind of supportive of resilience come from a skill like that. So
ACR, active constructive responding.
Yes.
It's that simple.
It's that simple. But what's really interesting is, with the soldiers, this was one of the skills where we would teach it, and then we would have our day and a half off. And so a lot of times, if the soldiers, if we were in Philly, they'd have friends and family, either in town or in New York's just a train ride away. And, they would have an opportunity to actually practice something that we just taught. And when we checked in with them about how it went, it's a lot of tears, a lot of, wow, I didn't realize that I was doing this style, and that's really impacting my marriage. Or I finally decided, one soldier said to take the train to New York. I hadn't talked to my sister because we had a family falling out over the, some issue a number of years ago. And I just showed up on her doorstep to say hi and that I'm sorry, and how tears all over the place, and it repaired the relationship. So it was interesting to see how they thought about carrying this through to their real life.
So much of what you've talked about is relationship oriented, and it's in your subtitle, or the second part of your book. It's about teams. Why is so much of our well-being associated with relationships, or the people that we work with, or the people in our life? Why isn't it just about ourselves?
So there's just so much research talking about, and this just came through again. A brand new study just landed on my desk literally this morning from the American Psychological Association. It was a study about resilience and people and how they processed the pandemic. And one of the things that they found was generally a resilient response by people, by at least the sample that they studied. But one of the key factors that people tended to employ or deploy was social support. And that was, if I can't get together with you physically, I'm going to call, I'm going to text, we're going to communicate, we're going to Zoom. I need to lean on you. I have a problem. I want to reach out to you. People who had higher levels of resilience during the pandemic really sought out those interpersonal resources. And as humans, we're hardwired to be around other people, to have a sense of belonging and to feel like we are part of, whether it's a family or a team, that really matters to us. And it doesn't have to be a big group of people. It doesn't have to be, dozens of people. If we have one or two people in our lives who we are sure of, who we know have our back, who we can reach out to and have that phone call at 2 a.m. if we need to, that's really what it is. And when there's a big loneliness problem right now in a lot of workplaces, in a lot of places generally. And so a lot of people who don't feel like they have that quality of relationship, it really can be suffering to our health. There's a study that was able to show that loneliness impacts our health in the same way that smoking and obesity does. And we don't think about that, and we don't prioritize it that way, right? There's warnings on, cigarette packages about, all of the problems that could happen. And we know how bad being overweight is for us, or obese, but we don't consider, not having those close interpersonal relationships to be as big of a deal. And it really is.
Well, I agree with you completely. I think one of the worst terms we came up with was social distancing. Physical distancing is what we should have been doing, but not social distancing. And I think one of the, and I'm not sure what happened in your city or area, but one of the biggest travesties of what happened is restrictions on people being able to go to long-term care facilities and helping their loved ones. If you were in your last years of life and all of a sudden you could no longer see your loved ones, you could no longer visit with your loved ones, and you were therefore alone. And particularly if then you restricted some of the attendance from coming by because of all the restrictions that were imposed, I think that would be a terrible way to live your last couple of years. And I can imagine that people died of loneliness as well as died, obviously, of COVID. So I think that it was a negative. This whole social distancing was the wrong term. We should have been socially close, but physically distant.
100%. And I don't think we really realized how important language was in that respect until we were well into the pandemic. And somebody mentioned that just that slight change in words to me, a couple of months into the pandemic. And it like a light bulb went on. And it was, of course, we're not supposed to be like cutting people out of our lives. We're supposed to just not be within 6 feet of them for a period of time, but we're still supposed to be connected to and reaching out to folks. So yes.
We're chatting with Paula Davis, who's the author of a book called Beating Burnout at Work: Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience. It's a book that you can get online or in your local bookstore. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments from Paula in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Paula Davis, who's the author of a book called Beating Burnout at Work: Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience. And we've, I think, had a really interesting conversation about her recipe called PRIME, which stands for, oh my gosh, what was PRIME? Positive relationships. R was for relationships. I was for impact. M is for mental strength. And E was for energy, positive emotional energy. And we've talked about rumination as a problem. And what was the other one? Catastrophizing. I know some people that ruminate a lot and go circling into catastrophizing. Yeah. Let me tell you. You talked a lot about this resilience at work. Mm-hmm. And we were just touching, I guess, on resilience in life with the pandemic. You mentioned that you've recently gone through a separation. And I wonder, how do you have resilience when you're going through a divorce or a separation or a breakup?
That's a fantastic question. And I feel honestly very blessed to have expertise, or at least practice in having taught, and for myself, well before this happened, practicing some of the skills that I know that I need for my own resilience. And so really knowing what to tap into and what my resources needed to be has been instrumental. So for me, it's been really about like making sure I'm feeling everything that's coming up for me, like in a lot of phases of this. And so I would say that, certainly while no breakup is ever fun, we're co-parenting very well. So there are quite a number of positive things that we can leverage and talk about together. Being able to reach out and lean on my friends has been huge. Most of my friends have gone through a significant breakup and or a divorce. And so getting their perspective and hearing what they did to get through it has been really, really helpful. I mean, just really has shifted my perspective on a lot of the ways that I view this. Having said that, I've had some pretty bad days. And so I think that's one of the things to really punctuate about resilience. Resilience is messy. It's not about having this clean reaction all the time to the challenges and struggles and adversities that we're going through. It's recognizing that you can have a day or a couple of days where you're crying, you don't want to get out of bed. I'm living in my PJs today, thank you very much, and I'm watching TV all day. I'm going to binge watch Netflix later. That can be resilience also. That processing of all of the emotions is important, and was really something that I was keen to do. I didn't want to rely on, having a couple of drinks at night, and not that I haven't done that, but, just really making sure I was processing everything that I was feeling and really thinking about learning the lessons that this relationship was here to teach me, so that I can take from this and either do something different or learn from it so that I can apply it to what I want a future healthy relationship to look like. And so it was really all of that. I mean, and it was, really paying attention to my physical health. I run most days, and exercise has always been really important to me. And, using that as a measure to really, do something healthy to process a lot of the struggle was really important. But I had some bad days, and just recognizing I'm wired more optimistically anyway. But to understand that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, it may not feel like it in the moment, but to recognize that, this is but a period of time, and it will get better, and there will be a corner that you can turn, was something that I really leaned on for myself. So really all those things.
Kind of interesting and probably challenging as you're going through this process to actually think about those lessons that you've learned from the bad relationship that you're going to apply, hopefully, to creating a better relationship in the future. What were some of the lessons that you learned about relationships?
I learned how much. So it's sort of this constellation of traits that I really value. It is, a combination of trust and respect and friendship. It's sort of the trio that I
trust, respect, and friendship.
Those are the three things that have become sort of like my, I don't know if you call it relationship, like core values or what have you, that I want to make, and fun, quite honestly, that are present in whatever the next relationship is going to be. And so, really, really recognizing that, and taking all of the information that I got from this one, and sort of making sure and prioritizing, because I was in my mid-20s when we got married, and you don't know everything about yourself necessarily at that point, and you're still learning about yourself and what you want in life, and what your values are, and what's meaningful and what's important, and all of that. And you sort that out as you get older, and hopefully if you're with somebody, whether it's in a marriage or just a committed relationship, you sort of sort that through and then grow together. And we, as we were sorting that through, kind of went in the opposite direction. And so really paying attention to, and really understanding, and really sort of like making sure that that's happening in a relationship, that you're sort of growing together and you're leaning into each other instead of leaning away from each other, I think will be something that I'll carry with me in whatever my next relationship is.
How do you ensure that you grow together?
I think a lot of it has to do with communicating and always like just being in clear touch with each other around, how are we doing and what's important for us and what are our goals and values, and do we still see the next 5 years in the same way, or what is it that's important for you and how can I help you get there? And just really having each other's back, in moments. And the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman, who are researchers who do a ton of work in relationships, talk about bids. And they say that in healthy relationships, when a partner makes a bid for their partner, that in healthy relationships, they oftentimes turn toward each other. Like when someone reaches out and says, I need some help, or this isn't going right, the other person says, okay, let's look at that. Let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation. Let's deal with it. Let's celebrate it if it's something that's good. And in relationships where divorce is more common, those bids tend to be ignored or avoided. So I think that it's recognizing those moments when your partner is saying, hey, like, here I am, like, let's chat about something, or let's celebrate something, that you're really remembering that to come together as a unit.
Trust, respect, friendship, and fun.
Yes.
Sounds good. We could make a new book out of that.
That'll be my next book. Yeah.
Paula Davis, author of Beating Burnout at Work, Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience. Thank you so much for joining us on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you, Brian.
I appreciate it. I'm going to go out and buy your book, which we can get online or at a bookstore. I really appreciate your joining us today and inspiring us a little bit about applied positive psychology and your mnemonic prime. Sounds like it's been an impact on your life and something that you've impacted 40,000 people in the Army with, and probably undoubtedly countless others. So thank you so much for joining us. That's our show for tonight, everyone. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6:00 on 960 AM. You can stream me online from anywhere in the world at www.saga960am.ca. You can get all my podcasts and video casts on my website, briancrombie.com, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Speakeasy, on Audible, on Apple, everywhere that you can get good videos or good podcasts. Paula, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Trust, respect, friendship, fun. Sounds like something we should all be doing.
Thanks, Brian.
Good night, everybody.